this is a process where the world is trying to collectively and peacefully totally restructure the global economy. That is really, really hard. And there's no shame in that sometimes that goes wrong.
Right, now look, I am currently embroiled in a domestic dispute, the details of which will become clear as we go through this podcast. But it's got me thinking about negotiation, about how to get your way. Do I even know what I want? Do I know how to get it? Have I got more or less power than I think I have? That is all interesting stuff. And then that got me thinking about society and how it works and how we're all kind of negotiating with each other all the time, sometimes explicitly, like when there are train strikes going on, but more often than that, just as part of moving around, literally moving around. We don't bump into each other on the pavement. We're all kind of negotiating out of each other's way. The whole of our relationships, particularly some of our professional ones, might be negotiations. It's absolutely critical, and I've often thought I'm not very good at it, so I thought I would speak to someone who is. Well, joining me this week on Your Brain on Climate is the wonderful Camilla Born. Camilla Born MBE, no less. And she got that MBE for her role in negotiation. Amongst other things, she was the Deputy Director of Strategy and the advisor to the COP26 President, Alok Sharma. So at the talks in Glasgow last year, she was there behind the scenes. You will see pictures of the COP President, and behind the COP President is Camilla. She was at the cutting edge of negotiations and some of the most important stuff upon which humanity has ever negotiated, and she understands how to do it, when it works, when it doesn't work, and she's got a really interesting kind of view of the surrounding picture. So not just what happens inside the cloistered halls of negotiation, but all the stuff around it. What makes governments do anything in the first place? On the one hand, they've got pressure from campaigners and Extinction Rebellions and people saying you must all do this or you're a bastard. But on the other hand, they've got the reality of people's lives and money and economics and finance and how quickly it's possible to do things. And they've got all of that on a global scale. And it sounds bloody exhausting and also kind of exhilarating. So I asked Camilla all about not just her experiences in negotiating on climate change, but negotiation as a thing and how each of us can be better negotiators, including when it comes to thinking about what we want to happen about the planet. As always, when you hear this noise, it denotes wisdom. That means I've put a little note in the show notes where you can find out more about a thing that has just been said by someone wise, which is almost certainly, in this case, not me. Thank you to everyone who sponsors me on Patreon. That allows me to pay my guests for coming on, which I think is really, really important. I'm taking their time. They're important, clever, busy people. You can join them by going to Patreon. If you go to Your Brain on Climate, so www.patreon.com/yourbrainonclimate. Get better at saying that, Dave. And thank you to the people who email me telling me they like the show. Share it. Make everyone aware of it. I'm on Twitter at BrainClimate. You can email me at hello@yourbrainonclimate.com. Right, on with it. So here is the chat with Camilla. And I started out by broaching the delicate matter of my domestic negotiation, which I am absolutely, firmly losing.
Your brain on climate.
Hello. Thank you so much for joining me on Your Brain on Climate. And I want to talk to you about negotiation, which is a thing I think I'm pretty shit at. I think I'm pretty shit at it in my personal life. We're currently negotiating, my wife and I, about the toilet seat, and I'm definitely not negotiating well about that. And in general, and I think some people, you know, when you meet people and they're just amazing at negotiation. So you must be one of them people that just always gets what they want, right?
I give it my best shot. I wouldn't say always, and I can't say always because otherwise I'd be, giving all my cards away and showing how I operate.
Ah, she's clever. All right. Okay. I see how it works. But were you kind of always a negotiator? Like, do you think you were born to do it?
I think I was always someone who wanted to work towards what I considered to be the right answer, which I guess is that. I mean, if you ask my parents, I think they'd probably agree with that.
Well, kids are superb negotiators, though, aren't they? Like, considering that they have really no power and they don't have a hand, but they play it very well.
Exactly. So, I started early.
So tell me some of the things that, in fact, let's take a step back. What is negotiation, would you say? Like, how do you, if someone says to you, what do you do? What is negotiation?
So I think it's when if you have an outcome in mind that you're trying to achieve, whatever that is, if that is that you want to eat a particular thing for dinner that evening, and then you have to engage with the people or the person or the country or whoever it is to get to that outcome. So you need to work with them to get yourself there. And a lot of it is about putting yourself in their shoes, having the empathy, but also using the power that you have. So if we go back to a parent-child situation, if you're the parent, it's a lot easier to push on the child what you want as the outcome. But then again, if you're potentially a difficult child and you've got lots of power over dinner time and your parents are exhausted by the fact that you never eat with them, then perhaps you have more power in that situation, and therefore you can push it through. Or it might be that you enlist a sibling and that sibling is the one that helps you to get to the outcome. So we're constantly negotiating our way through life, and it's about getting what you want, really.
I really want to talk about all the different bits of like power and stuff, because that's all really relevant when we go and talk about climate changey stuff. But it is really interesting, isn't it, that often, do you think people have more power than they realise sometimes, and part of the job is realising what power you have? Yeah,
definitely. I mean, I think people sort of go around, different roles, different jobs, different experiences in life looking for power, but you just have to step into it and use it for what you can. And the power is for the taking. It's not sort of innate and given. Obviously, there are some authoritative positions that you might be in that mean that you have more of it. But still, a lot of the time, people just want to get to that you might find others that have power that want to get to an answer. And so you have to step into your power and work with that with them. But it's a journey. You explore it and you find it. And I think that if you're organised and you know what you want, you can manifest a lot of power.
What do we want?
More equitable treatment in the hands of management.
When do we want it?
Soon.
Very good. Right, we're going to learn by the end of this episode. You were going to teach me how to recognise and manifest my own power. Frankly, I could have done with you several years ago. Right, let's talk about some of the bits within negotiation that are kind of interesting brain-wise. And if I say, I was reading a thing, as will be evident. If I say to you anchoring bias, does that mean anything to you, or have I just plucked a silly word out of thing?
Well, it doesn't mean anything to me.
Ah, right. Well, anchoring bias.
I want to hear all about it.
Anchoring bias. You know what this is. Anchoring bias. It says in this thing that I read, is the idea that if you say to me how much the thing cost, and I say I give you a number, I say that's 20 quid. Then you immediately form an impression of the sort of worth of something based on what I've told you first of all. So it's probably in my interest to think very carefully about what I say to you first, because you're going to negotiate on the back of it. Like if your role is to haggle downwards, so I better make sure I've given you a high price that you can haggle down from, right? That kind of thing.
Yeah. Absolutely.
And presumably that happens in negotiation all the time, when you don't turn up at the table if you're going to negotiate with someone and say, here's my final offer, and it actually is your final offer. Like you actually kind of want to give something that seems unreachable so that people can kind of chip you down from it, right?
That's definitely one negotiation strategy, but it does depend on who you're turning up with. Some people respond best to the final offer, and that they might be responding to that because you've already got a pre-relationship, which means that that's how you operate together. So absolutely recognise that kind of strategy, and I think it's incredibly common, especially when the players don't know each other as well. But it's not the only way of doing it. I always say that you need the spectrum to find the middle, and that's why, so much when you're trying to get to any kind of outcome, having your radical flanks is so important to be able to find that middle. And, I have a huge amount of, I know I'm not going to talk about climate too much, but I have a huge amount of respect for activists and more radical activists, because there's no way that I would be able to broker my kind of more consensus middle if you didn't have that radical flank as well.
Right, I'm taking a note of that, and we're going to come back to that. So if that interests you, we're going to talk about this later on.
Great.
Radical flank, because yes, that's important, right? And some people aren't really in the business of negotiating really anyway, right? They're just like, well, this is this is it. Take it or leave it. But I advise you to take it because otherwise I'm going to do stuff that annoys you.
Yeah, absolutely. And you need people like that.
Very good. Okay. Another, also in this thing that I read, is that you should negotiate the negotiation. And I was like, what's that talking about? But that presumably, because you've done a lot of work like with big governmenty things, quite a large part of the job is going, what is it we're even talking about? Like kind of what is it that's up for grabs, right?
I think that's true. I think also sometimes you can negotiate the negotiation so that you can get away with not getting to the outcome and use it as a delay tactic. I remember being at one negotiation session in Bonn. It was a sort of a pre-sessional meeting for the UN climate talks, the big ones, the COPs at the end of the year. And I think it was Russia at the time just held up negotiations for a week and wouldn't adopt the agenda because they were contesting something on it. So you can negotiate the norms of the process, and a lot of conversation is spent on process, not just outcomes.
So, like in the leaving the toilet seat up example, we could spend ages negotiating whether or not I leave the toilet seat up or down, or we could negotiate whether or not we're going to have a conversation about whether or not I leave the toilet seat up or down. Right?
Yeah, absolutely. You can extrapolate, even further. Let's talk about the cultural context in this, the power dynamics that you're bringing to this conversation. Is it even appropriate that we start having this conversation? Do you understand what you're doing? There's all sorts of ways to play it if you don't want to get to the end game.
Fab. I'm taking notes on this superb stuff. Do you have a position on the whole toilet seat thing?
Do I have a position? Yeah, I think that, again, I'm right and I can negotiate myself to a happy household and have done so. So I'm all good.
And does it help with negotiation to be an unfeeling, unemotional robot? Like, are they the best negotiators? People who can just be kind of calm and calculated? Or how important is emotions in the whole thing?
So I think that's a tactic. I also think, I've worked in international negotiations, so I see it from different cultures. And some cultures are like that. And they deploy that part of their cultural selves, although they normally have a really good understanding of the international in that, if they're in that space, to their advantage, so that they don't have to waste time with people lobbying them because everyone knows, nope, that's just who they are and how they are, and you have to work around it or work with it or whatever. So that can definitely work. But in general, I think you need quite a lot of empathy. And I think that people underestimate how much that empathy is very local. So there's an empathy for, grand things like the unfairness of climate change. But there's also an empathy which is, oh, you've just got off a really long flight, or I've known you for 20 years and I know that you're having a tough time with your child. And all of those social dynamics play out. I won't say the process, but there was once a sort of period of negotiations that I was involved in, and I had various PhD students interviewing me for writing their theses and asking me about it. And they were saying, why has this country moved in such a radical way? This was a big turning point. And I can tell you that the person was ill and there was a replacement, and that's what moved this international position. And those things happen all the time. So, there's a lot of being human in negotiation. And I hope that ChatGTP will not replace that, because we need some of that randomness as well as design in getting to the right answers.
L'accord de Paris pour le climat est accepté.
It's always struck me as ridiculous that the bit at the end of the climate talks is the bit when all the final deals are kind of done. And those bits are normally when people have been up for 48 hours and it's 4 a.m. And presumably there's an awful lot of like, all right, fine, Jesus Christ, yes, happens at a human level.
Yeah, I think there's some of that. Although, it's a huge amount of responsibility in that kind of context, because you're bringing the weight of your country with you. And at the end of a negotiation, everyone needs to go home with something for them. So if that is the example of a child asking their parents for a particular thing for dinner, perhaps the parents go home with the relief that the child actually wants to eat and is going to be present at the table, and the child gets what they want. If it's in international negotiations, you've got to consider that a climate vulnerable country has to go home to their people and say, we made progress and it's going to be okay. You've also got to consider that a petrostate needs to be able to go home and say, don't worry, we're going to continue to be able to make the money that we need to keep our economy on the road and protect our people. So it's always a little bit of you've got to find the compromise, you've got to find the landing ground. So I'm always really impressed with how much people are able to sort of hold themselves together, because it's much bigger than the individuals at the end, in the end. But it's not to say that that's not the only deal that's gone on. There will be a series of deals that have already happened in capitals. There will be sort of quiet bilateral agreements ahead of time. There will be, things done and decided, and then you'll have a kind of sequencing so that you can get to things over time as well. So that kind of bit that hits the headlines is very much the end of it. But that's also very important for the story that gets told. And sometimes the wrong story gets told because we fixate on that end piece, and it's not an accurate reflection really of everything that's come together.
Well, you mean like we'll look at did the talks achieve a commitment to, I don't know, 1.5 degrees or something like that? And they'll look at that and they'll go pass or fail, basically, on the basis of that. But actually, there's so much else has happened.
Or, for example, so in Glasgow, the end of the talks was a conversation about, do we say coal phase out or coal phase down? I have been working on it for 2 years and telling everyone, we're doing all this work on coal. The critical things are that countries decide that they're going to stop financing coal, they're going to build no new coal, they're going to decide to phase out coal. We will have a conversation in and around negotiations, but it's very, very, very unlikely that any of that text will be in negotiations because there's no precedent for it, and it would be a very different state of affairs. And then it was in the text, and then I thought at some point this is going to get taken out, and then it was still there, and that became the sort of end game play out. But in a way, that was like the cherry on the cake. We'd already baked the cake. We'd already made a huge amount of progress. But the fixation was, did something happen around this? And this is partly because people need to be able to tell stories around these moments. And it's hard because no one meeting is going to solve climate change, right? You don't ride off thinking, woohoo, solve climate change. But you can say, okay, we built momentum and confidence into it. We built momentum and confidence out of it. It was the turning point. It moved this thing forward. But it's one piece of the puzzle, and you've got to use it as effectively as possible. But it's not the be-all and end-all.
Sounds bloody exhausting, Camilla.
It is.
Like, is it proper negotiation? Is it exhausting?
Yeah, it's really exhausting, because this kind of logic of nothing's agreed until everything's agreed in international negotiations is really hard, because you've got this sort of house of cards and one could be pulled out at any moment and you just don't know.
So you mean just by that you mean that like there's a final agreement, and that agreement's only going to happen when everyone's happy with all the bits of it, kind of thing.
Yeah, because you've basically got to say this is being agreed and have no one blocking it. So you have to be pretty confident that there's a kind of shared understanding of that. And that's very powerful, because that means that, it's the only forum in the world where you've got the smallest country standing next to the biggest country and has equal power to be able to disrupt that. Obviously, in reality, they don't have equal power because they have different political standings, different economic standings, different social standings, and also personality as well, different charisma. And you can't underestimate that. But nonetheless, there is the potential to do that, and that is a very powerful setup.
So last question before we move off negotiation as a thing, and I'm sure I could talk to you about this all day, but I did want to talk about the empathy thing. We talked about it a minute ago. Do you have what do you mean when you say you've got to have empathy for people? Do you mean, which of the following? A, you're talking to a human and you kind of want to understand their position because that's nice? Or do you mean you're talking to a human and you want to understand their position so you can defeat it? Like, how sort of cynical is the empathy? I saw a phrase Professor Sunny Lee had used called tactical empathy, the idea that you're basically using it to win. Is that fair?
I think it depends on the situation. You can absolutely have both, and I recognise both. It also depends on the person. Like, you might even have within the same country a person who is more tactical with their empathy and a person who is more genuine with their empathy. The person who's genuine with their empathy, in my view, is able to sort of make it last longer and have more impact over time, whereas the tactical one burns bridges more quickly. But you kind of pull those cards at the moments where you have to. And again, especially when you're doing negotiation as a job, it's much bigger than you. Like, you're negotiating for your country, for your business, for your family, whatever it is. And it's not just about you and how you play it. So sometimes you have to do things which you, as an individual, may not always want to do. And that's sort of part of the course of taking on that role.
Do you think it's a thing you can learn? Or are some people just really good at it? Is it one of those things that when some people are born to be great negotiators?
So I definitely think you can learn, and I've definitely learnt a lot. And, you know, I think I had a kind of natural instinct for it, in a professional sense, having, you know, done it with my parents. Yeah, you can definitely learn and hone those skills. I think things that you can't learn, and again, shouldn't be underestimated, is that obviously the kind of privileges and biases that you have help or hinder. And there are some people that you talk to who are very good at sort of playing the idiot, but they're actually very smart and use it like to their advantage. And there are some people who, you know, like my accent certainly helps. Like, I have a kind of BBC English accent or whatever.
It's very nice. I'm enjoying listening to it. And I would do whatever it told me to.
Yeah. And also in an international negotiation, like, I'm a well-spoken, clear-spoken English native speaker, and it's done in English. Like, that has a power to it. And it's easier to hold the pen. So there are all of those dynamics that play out as well, which give you a strategic advantage. So you can definitely learn, you can definitely improve. You can also manifest your power in different ways. Like, maybe you get known as a personality. So there's been some small countries who, you know, have sort of played the media game a little bit, and that has given them a power that is much bigger than other comparable small countries. Or they, I don't know, went to school in the US, so they are able to speak really good English, and that gives them a power. So there's all these different ways of sort of acquiring tools and skills and advantages which really help you to be more and more effective.
Your brain on climate.
Brill. Okay, right. So we have talked a bit about kind of negotiation at the human level. And what I wanted to ask you is, if we didn't have it, would we have this society, what we've got? Like, is all of society kind of one big negotiation?
I think we all negotiate on a daily basis. We negotiate with ourselves to work out what we want.
Oh, hello.
She's
going deep again. What do you mean by that? Give us an example.
So I haven't had any breakfast today.
Oh.
I'm going to have a negotiation with myself about what kind of breakfast I'm going to have, depending on how hungry I am, how healthy I'm feeling, how easily I'm going to be seduced by the delicious cornetti, which is like a croissant, basically, that they look in the coffee bar. So that's a negotiation with yourself, trading off on all of these choices. And then you have to negotiate your way with choices with other people if that is your partner, as you say, in your home context, and there's a lot of negotiation there, as we know, or if that is negotiation about with your employer or with your community or more broadly. So yeah, I think negotiation is sort of part and parcel to making decisions effectively, and so it's something that we're all part of all of the time, and yeah, it's part of how we navigate the world.
Well, literally as well. Something that jumped into mind was walking down the street is a negotiation, isn't it? Like, how amazing is it that we don't all bump into each other? And the reason we don't is because we're all kind of negotiating the space. And you can see sometimes, stupid people who won't get out of the way, who just think they've got the space, who are using the power they've got to just kind of barrel through. And at a micro level, that's what's going on there, right? Yeah,
absolutely. It's the world we live in. It's having a relationship with the others around us and getting things done in the process, be that walking down the street.
And we are a social species. Like all of these skyscrapers that we built and these international agreements and all of this stuff has only happened through people working together, which requires negotiation, presumably.
Yeah, absolutely. You have to get those things signed off. And even in, a more authoritarian kind of context, there's still a negotiation. That person is still having to decide within their context, and they're never going to be fully alone in that about what they're going to do.
Well, sometimes I guess we have examples of like when negotiation comes to the fore. I mean, you've worked on the climate talks, but as we record, UK is still got loads of strikes happening all over it. There's been strikes and then more strikes and loads of negotiations, or at least theoretical negotiations between the unions who represent various trades and the government who represent the government. And there's an awful lot of kind of posturing goes on, and an awful lot of negotiation seems to sort of happen in the court of public opinion rather than actually around the negotiation table. And is that where power comes in? Like, is a large part of the ability of, say, a trade union to get what they want the extent to which the public are on their side, and you have to play that game, do you think?
So I definitely think public opinion is a huge tool in negotiation, and it's interesting. So I worked outside of government in civil society, and then I went into government to work on the UN climate talks in Glasgow. And I thought potentially that I would go into government and realise that civil society is sort of less important because governments can make decisions. And I have to say, I found that actually civil society is more important and doesn't take itself seriously enough when I was inside government. So, that kind of broader ecosystem, that working of the inside and the outside of negotiation is really part of the alchemy of landing those kind of big deals. So, of course, there will be people on both the government and the union side trying to run different media strategies. They will be doing polling. They might do stunts that help to tell the story in a way that they want to move it in that direction. And they will use the theatre of the outside to help them set up the space for the inside. They will also use the theatre of the outside to frame up what the acceptable landing ground is. Because again, in a negotiation, you want to walk away where everyone feels that they've got something and they've saved face. And that is important. Otherwise, it will just fall apart because everyone will say, well, what's in this for me?
But that's so important just on the interpersonal level, isn't it? Like, I think about squabbles that you have, and they generally end when they end with both people feeling that they were sort of right in a way. And that's how you move on from it a little bit. So that happens as well, kind of at the, around the negotiating table, does it?
Yeah, or mutually wrong sometimes. It can go either way. But yeah, everyone has to walk away with something. Otherwise, you either it blows up and then you'd have to come back together anyway, or, you could be completely polarized, but the reason you're talking to one another is because you have a mutual interest in coming to an outcome. And that's what people do to resolve union disputes, and that's what people will do to help us deal with international climate change.
Issue. Now, it's, of course, very unlikely the government's going to do anything of the sort. In fact, they're pursuing a strategy that's completely the opposite of what Extinction Rebellion is asking for. The government is, in fact, expanding oil and gas extraction in the UK.
You said a thing in passing there, which is about how civil society groups actually have more power than they might think, so like climate campaigning sort of groups. Tell me a bit more about that and what you mean and how they maybe don't recognise the power they've got.
So I think that one of the things that civil society can do is that it has an independence that means it can talk to many more actors. So when you are a government, you may be part of a country group, and you can talk to your group, but the information quite often that civil society has from their various contracts across various governments is sometimes more sophisticated because they have trust with those governments in a way that another government, yes, they may have some trust and individuals will have built trusted relationships, but it is a bit different. So sometimes civil society can see the bigger picture better than government can. I also think that civil society can be helpful in sort of pushing the envelope, pushing the focus of the media into a particular spot to push the, sort of load on the expectations in a space. And sometimes that can be really helpful and sometimes that can be really unhelpful. I think that...
Do you mean like around the climate talks when civil society can say like, one talk to save the planet, this is it, we've all got to come out of here with a great outcome or we're all going to die immediately, that kind of thing?
Yeah, or, oh, well, these talks are definitely going to do, I don't know, stop all gas exploration. And It's like, well, that's just not even on the agenda. Like, it's just not feasible. And please don't lead people down the garden path because there's no conversation. But at the same time, sometimes raising that as a prospect may mean that a few years later it becomes something because people have to have some kind of conversation and it moves things forward. So, there's a bit of randomness to it as well. I think that some civil society, you're never going to be in a situation, I don't think, out of a UN climate talks where all civil society is happy with the outcome. And that is part of the job of some parts of civil society. There are also other parts of civil society that play more of a brokering role and do more bridging. And they are incredibly important as well for helping define what pragmatic good looks like. And it's in everyone's interests for these talks not to fail, even those who want things to go slower because they want to protect their vested interests. That's a completely legitimate reason for slowing things down. But everyone knows that we have to deal with climate change and everyone knows the direction of travel and everyone is working towards that. And, I broadly believe that there is that kind of good in that direction. So helping to work out what that landing ground is and push things is really important. And I think civil society should recognise and take that power and own it and take themselves a little bit more seriously sometimes.
This is important, isn't it? And do you think that the likes of Extinction Rebellion, who will say stuff like, I think they've stopped saying this kind of thing quite so much, but will say stuff like, right, in 5 years, we want the entire economy off fossil fuels. That's what we want. Is that helpful for you in the work that you do for the sort of compromising negotiations of getting stuff done?
I think it's a tactic. And I think that if that helped more people to understand that we needed to get to net zero, and we also, because of the consequences of not, and also that we needed to get there fast, that's really important when it's then going a bit slower and it's hard, that people want to be part of that and want to have a government that is helping deliver that and want to have businesses and investors and community groups and everything also delivering that and recognising the value of it. So it's not unhelpful. I think that the target around 2025 net zero was probably too, wasn't feasible in a way that was providing a middle ground, but it did have a kind of disruptive awareness raising and also does help to pull that part of the spectrum so that the middle of, say, 2050, even though that is fast for the amount of economic transformation that's going to happen,
yeah,
still makes it look sort of much easier. And so maybe that helps prevent it from drifting to a 2060 or 2070. That's kind of part of the logic. I think that, however, being that radical means that you then, you're not the ones who are necessarily engaging with government around policy decisions. You are more using a kind of political movement that then others from that can engage. And, there are many other climate organisations, think tanks, etc., who can do that off the back of XR's kind of mobilization. I think where they went wrong is they started to alienate people with some of their actions. And obviously now they've rebased and are trying to have a more inclusive space again. And to my mind, that's exciting. Not to say that you shouldn't have also the really radical campaigners who are doing the disruptive things, because we've seen time and time again that is part of social change. But different people have to play different roles if we really want to get to the outcomes. And them doing that is not going to overnight change the outcome to something really radical like net zero 2025. But them being part of that broader movement, as well as, you know, a boring person like me being part of the broader movement, is really important so that you can move things forward. It's a sum of its parts. It's not just one or the other.
It seems that what we're talking about, we're talking about negotiation, but we're kind of talking about compromise, really, as well. I did think about calling this episode Compromise. And you see, the thing that's, I guess, troubling me is that you might get two very different analyses of the problem going on. I want to know where you land on this, which is the world that you inhabit and have inhabited, which basically goes, look, in practice, we can't do this all incredibly quickly overnight. We're going to have to do some compromising. Right? And life being one big compromise, and just the reality, the grubby kind of reality of politics and stuff. And on the other end, you've got the people who look at the planet and how naused it is and say, I don't want to compromise on that, because if I do, we're all going to die. And it seems that somewhere in the middle of that is a problem. Like, how should we actually be, is it acceptable to compromise on ending all coal production in the next 10 years, say, when you think about all life on Earth and its survival and that?
So my only issue with the word compromise is it sounds boring and it sounds negative. And I think that it's important that these things aren't. And you are right that, you know, the impacts of compromising on some of these issues have consequences, and they have consequences for the planet. But I also think we need to remember that the impacts of not compromising would also have consequences for the planet and people. And I will say, I don't care about climate change. Climate change is totally hypothetical. A degree of warming, what does that even mean? But I do care about what climate change does to the things I care about.
Okay.
And so if that is, you know, the food that I eat, if that's the way I'm able to engage with my family, if that's the landscapes that we see and we experience and are part of our personal histories and our collective histories, if that's about fairness locally or internationally or whatever those things are, those are things I actually care about. And to really understand how much risk we want to take in terms of fast implementation, fast action to deal with climate change, and how much risk we want to take to deal with the reality of climate change, you've really got to look at all of those trade-offs. We're in a situation now that our life is living with climate change now. That's what the future is. We're also living with transition. And that's what the future is. And we have to make a bunch of different choices in that context about what that life's going to be looking like. I think for a long time, the climate space sort of depicted this, oh, this is a utopia if we deal with climate change. And that was okay when it was a bit more fringe, because it was like a nice, green, pure, clean utopia. But this is the mainstream. You know, in the mainstream, things happen that we don't like. Corruption. Things happen that we don't like, huge profits, you know, these kind of ideas that the public, I say we as a kind of general public opinion perspective, we don't like that unfairness, we don't like that grubbiness. But that is the reality of mainstream economies. It's not to say that you shouldn't push for better, push for more, but we will have an impact. You know, we do not walk on this planet without having an impact, even if that is your footprints in the dirt. That is the reality of being part of it. And we have to do that responsibly. We have to make choices. But everything we do has consequences. And anything we do, be that doing nothing or doing something, has consequences too. And we have to bear those things in mind. We have to be careful, though. We shouldn't overthink this. It's happening to us already. So we've just got to get on with it. But it's not. There will be losers and there will be winners. And who those losers and winners are is our negotiation, is our battle for power, and how we navigate the future.
Human society inherently is built on kind of messy compromises all over the place. And the art of governing, I suppose, and of keeping, even in democracies, is of kind of balancing out like harms and benefits and kind of having a thing of that. And if what you're trying to do is do a global version of that, you are inherently, you're in that world, right? Like you can't make 150 governments, whatever it is, do something overnight that would just get them voted out the next day. It's not going to happen, right? And I suppose that's the reality of it. Just somewhere in there, you can see why some people are like, no, but look at all life on Earth, and kind of having that, that higher level problem.
Absolutely. But, the UN climate talks are really important. They send really important signals to governments, to businesses, to investors, to communities to do things differently. But they are only one piece of the puzzle. And the only reason that they can send those signals is because countries come together, having made policy choices at home that they can then bring to the table as their negotiation positions. So it's not like this all happens over a 2-week period in a bizarre conference centre. This is a process where the world is trying to collectively and peacefully totally restructure the global economy. That is really, really hard. And there's no shame in that sometimes that goes wrong.
Yeah, a global economy that only exists because of fossil fuels in the form that it's in right now. So the demand to take fossil fuels out of it is necessarily a big job, right?
Yeah, but it's also the system we live in. Like I have the lights on here. I have this laptop plugged in. I
thought you cared about the planet, Camilla.
Exactly. There's no way in being purist on this. And, the people who want to prevent action from happening around climate change, they lean into let's be pure, because then you get paralyzed. And we don't live in that world. We have to make these trade-offs. And, I always remember watching a political panel debate with Nigel Farage, and he was asked, do you care about climate change? And he said, I fly, of course I don't. And that shuts down every single person who flies. And, I hold my hands up. I also fly. And, that doesn't mean I shouldn't be fighting for more climate action and leaning into those better choices that we should be making. So, we've got to be careful with this. We've got to empower. We've got to help make choices. And trying to do this peacefully is hard. When you look back at every single economic big shift in the past, it's not always been peaceful. And there will be elements of it that will be difficult and not peaceful. But it does give me hope that 197 parties are able to come together at these UN climate talks and walk away with something. That is real testament to that shared understanding of that we do have to deal with this problem. And it's deeply imperfect, it's deeply frustrating, it's tough, really, really tough, but super, super impactful.
I'll show you how to do it. What you want to do is you want to grab somewhere, preferably at the top, gently lower the toilet seat down. You don't want to make any loud noises. Boom.
Right, okay, last thing before I let you go and have your, what are those things called? Cornettis?
Cornetti.
Camilla's in Italy, by the way. She's not just found some very fancy Italian deli. Last thing, 3 tips to help each of us be better negotiators. What should we all be mindful of? Off you go.
Know what you want.
Right.
Quite often people don't actually know what they want, and so you can't negotiate for something you don't know what you want. Secondly, I would say that piece around empathy. So I believe you should have it rather than tactically use it. Not to say that it doesn't get tactically
used. Hang on,
used.
write this down. Get some empathy. Right, yeah, good. Yeah.
But I think that's also very important for not being disappointed, because if you have empathy, then you can find out where you can have a perspective on where you might actually land. And thirdly, I would say play the long game, because sometimes you're negotiating just in the moment, But quite a lot of things that were introduced into any negotiation at some point may not pay dividends for 10 years, but at some point it might come back around. So you've got to, have your coffee, be awake, be dealing with your little thing that you're trying to have to do at that particular moment, especially if you've been up all night, if it's in a international climate context. But you also need to think, what is it here that we're setting a precedent for or scratching an itch on that means that next year there's going to be an itch and we might be able to move even further forward?
And I guess, is it really worth it in the first place? If the thing you are negotiating on, i.e. whether or not I should put the toilet seat down, I know I should put the toilet seat down, stop looking at me like that, is just put the bloody toilet seat down. It's not worth the hassle. You'll just fall out with your wife, right?
I mean, I think that is the correct answer.
Camilla, thank you so much. I wanted to say thank you on behalf of the planet, because I know how much work you have done and how important you've been to the agreements that we've got. Just thank you for that. Thank you for coming on here on Your Brain on Climate. Is there anything, any way people can follow you, get in touch with what you do and say and think?
Sure. You can find me on Twitter. It's a very original handle. It's at Camilla Born, and Born is spelled B-O-R-N.
Right, wonderful stuff. Thank you, Camilla. Thank you so much. I did mean what I said there, that I think people like Camilla just don't get anywhere near enough love for the work that they do, which, is the grubby, horrible, sweaty, exhausting reality of getting people in a room and not letting them out until they've agreed to do something, and having to manage it so that people actually leave feeling like they've won, even if actually they haven't. I think that is a skill, and, it's all very well getting some top tips, but thank you, Camilla. Top stuff. Right, that's it. I will be back next month with more of this. Do share the word about the podcast. Write a review, please, with your hands. A couple of people have been doing that in the last month, but I'd love a lot more. It makes such a massive difference. If you've enjoyed this episode, go to iTunes. I think that's the best thing to do. And just say how much you like the show. It honestly helps hugely. You can email me hello@yourbrainonclimate.com, or I'm on Patreon, and I'm on the Patreon at patreon.com/yourbrainonclimate if you want to chuck in a few quid to help me get great guests for the future and say thank you for the show. Right, I am off to recommence negotiations, although I think I might just put the bloody toilet seat down and be done with it, eh? Okay, bye.